Hello, and welcome to this MRS conference panel discussion on the state of DEI in market research and the way forward. I'm Andrew Cannon, Executive Director of GRBN, and I have the honor of hosting this panel discussion. And on the panel today, we have 5 wonderful people who are going to share their words of wisdom on where we are today, where we should be going, and how we're going to get there. And I'd like to briefly introduce the panel. We have Charlene Adamar, who is the Director of Client Solutions at the Schlesinger Group and co-founder of Colour of Research. We have Dinah Bowen, who is Managing Director at Escalent, and also DEI co-chair at Escalent, as well as a board member of the Insights Association Idea Council. And we have Stephen Lacey from Outside Insights, who is also co-chair of MRS Unlimited. And we have Franklin Nadsambo from Lucid, where he is a senior project consultant. And last but not least, we have Kiona Osborne from Escalent, who is co-chair of the DEI Council at Escalent, as well as analysis there. So the panel will come on later to talk about this issue. But before I bring them on, I'd just like to share with you a few slides from our recent research into the state of diversity, equality, and inclusion across the globe. And we're going to focus on a couple of issues. We're going to focus on DEI and workplace culture, and we're going to focus on personal experience with discrimination. And we're going to touch on these 2 topics through 4 lenses, through looking at health issues, at ethnicity, at gender, and also at sexual orientation. And the research we're going to reference wouldn't have been possible without our corporate partners, who you can see here, and we'd like to thank them all for their wonderful contribution to this research, which we were so able to produce towards the end of last year with fieldwork conducted from, I think, the 20th of October to the 22nd of November. And we covered 10 countries thanks to the support of our National Association partners. We covered Argentina, Australia, Brazil, Canada, Germany, Japan, Norway, as well as Peru and the UK and the US. And we conducted approximately 10,000 interviews with the general public sample and approximately 2,000 interviews with people working in the MR sector across the globe. And it's important to compare those 2 groups when we look at some of the results. So the first question we want to look at is equal opportunity. And do people see that there is equal opportunity within the industry where they work? And this chart shows that in the research sector, if you look at the top number, as many as 30% of people working in the sector do not believe that there is equality on an average across these different issues that you can see listed down below. And that's much higher than amongst the general population, where that number comes in at approximately 23%. This chart shows that age and disability are the 2 factors on which people in general feel there is where there is not equal opportunity to progress. But this obviously varies according to the group in question. So, for example, I'll just give an example on sexual orientation, gender identity down the bottom for this, where it's 18% is the number there. But if you were to look at that number amongst people working, amongst people in the LGBTQ plus cohort, that number increases to 29%. So obviously this is hugely dependent upon the cohort in question. The other lens I'd like to look at this on is the disability lens. So again, that number that we've got here at 42% on an average across different disabilities or health impairments or conditions If we looked at that amongst specific conditions, we can see that number rises to a very high 59% amongst people with mental illness within the market research industry. So the overall number of 30% that we had rises to 42% with people with any conditions, and then up to a high of 59% of people with mental illness. The second issue I'd like to look at here is the issue of culture, and we looked at an issue of, or we analysed 20 different statements related to workplace culture, and then we brought those statements together to create 5 different factors, which I'm showing you here. And the brief summary from this chart is that the market research sector outperforms the general public on the 2 factors of opportunity and recognition as well as belonging. But as you can see down the bottom of this chart, does not do so well when it comes to concerted efforts of the organization on DEI issues, or indeed a diverse employer base, where that number is much higher in the research sector. I'd like to drill down a little bit into the diverse employer base to look at leadership. And this chart shows that as many as 4 in 10 people working in the MR sector does not believe that their organization has a diverse leadership team, which, as you can see, compared to the gray bar, is so much higher for there. So there's definitely an issue within the industry when it comes to diversity of leadership, as well as programs to deal with DEI issues. So the second issue I want to touch on before I bring on the panel is personal experience with direct discrimination in the workplace. Again, we looked at this on a number of different factors, which we then brought down to 3 overall factors, which are shown here. And the good news is on this is that the MR industry or sector overall performs better than the general public when it comes to direct experience, whether that's to do with unfair treatment, the negative colleague environment, or indeed harassment within the company where they work. If we looked at it by the type of discrimination, however, that number hides some key differences that we really want to highlight. And the first one I want to highlight today is the issue of gender. So although we have an average of 14% of people in the sector saying that they've experienced direct discrimination because of gender, you can see a huge difference from female to male on this. So as many as 1 in 4 females say they have experienced direct discrimination because of their gender, with that number falling to 1 in 20 amongst cisgender males. The second lens I would like to use to look at direct discrimination is sexual orientation and gender identity. And I'd like to point the chart to your attention to this part of the chart where we're looking at people in the LGBTQ plus cohort, where that number is as many as 15% amongst males and as many as 7% amongst females. So a considerable proportion of people within that cohort have faced direct discrimination because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. And the final lens I'd like to put on this is to look at ethnicity. And in this chart, we're going to focus on the UK, and we're going to look at 2 issues related to ethnicity. The first is the first issue we touched on, of whether people feel they have equal opportunity. So if we looked at white-only people within the UK, that number in the MR sector is 42% say no to that question, whereas people with other race, ethnicity, that number rises to 77%. And down the bottom, if we look at personal experience with discrimination due to ethnicity or race, again, you can see a huge difference by the ethnicity race breakdown, with 1% amongst white only and as many as 45%, almost 1 in 2 amongst other ethnicity races. So I hope this gave you sort of a brief look at where we are today. And now I'd like to bring on the panel who are going to talk to this and to give their views on where we are today before we move forward to the other questions. So if we could bring the panel on, please. Welcome, panel. Hopefully you managed to get through that without getting too nervous.
No, it was great, Andrew, and thank you for having us.
Excellent. You're more than welcome, Charlie. Maybe you can kick off and give us your views on where we are today.
Yeah, happily. I mean, I think it's really clear to see from that, and thank you for putting all of that work in to produce that, that there's a lot of work that needs to be done across the board. It's quite reassuring in a sense that the research world seems to have recognised the importance of needing diversity in the workplace across all boards, but there is a lot to be done for the fact that the percentage of people that do believe there's not equality within the workplace isn't a great thing. And it's now time, I think, for the steps to be taken to actually fix these things. What I've been finding, I think, that is happening is that there's been a lot of discussion around this. And we're at the stage of discussion and at the stage of sort of realisation, probably. And I guess next is going to be action. And to separate the people that are just talking about it and the people that actually want to be about it and actively make these changes. And I think I feel as if that's where we're working towards at the moment.
Fantastic. Thanks, Charlene. Would anybody else like to jump in and say, was there anything sort of surprising, or did it sort of reaffirm how you see where we are today?
I could just add that the data is pretty consistent with some of our internal data. So as we look at our own demographic metrics within our organization, and we are looking at those metrics to try to understand benchmarks so that we can, mark this point in time and think about, okay, well, what change can we impart going forward? And those metrics are pretty similar. Specifically in our full-time employees, we have a little more balance as it relates to maybe ethnicity and gender in our part-time side of our business, part-time employees, but definitely full-time. I would say that resonates with us.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. There's somewhere where we seem to do a little bit better than the general public. If it's not obviously a comparison race as such, but it is interesting to benchmark to see in certain areas we seem okay, and then in other areas it seems that as a sector we've certainly got a lot of improvement that we could do.
I think we're changing quite a lot. So I always just see the market research industry very much like a tanker that was kind of moving very, very slow. I think we've probably come to a ferry now where we're kind of moving a little bit faster, but not maybe fast enough. And I think we're an industry that's about culture and being on the pulse of culture. And I think sometimes we're not quite there. I think we're moving in the right direction. I think there's lots of people with hearts. I think there's lots of conversations happening. I'm seeing a lot driven by younger audiences, which I find very, very refreshing. I see a lot being driven by clients. So I know it's a big shift in clients really wanting to kind of shift and kind of make change. But I think from a personal perspective, I'm disabled, so I've got what's called a lobster hand. I've got a missing fibula and a shortening of tibia, and I'm also dyslexic. And I just want to see some of those barriers kind of stripped down. So as a dyslexic person, I often felt kind of stupid, and coming from a working class kind of background and also disabled, sometimes I'd feel an outsider because maybe I didn't have the right conversations, or I couldn't kind of go on the kind of skiing trips. So I think there's certain kind of things, or when I met a client, and then at the end, the client turned around and knows my disability and then says kind of, what's wrong with you? And I think breaking down those walls are really, really important. And there's a lovely story from a young girl I know, Oxford graduate, Asian, she's blind, got first, desperate to work in market research, and not one market research company would employ her. And I think that's, for me, that's failing, and that's where I want to see more emphasis put on.
Oh, great, thank you, Stephen. So let's bring in a couple of the younger people on the panel. Not that anybody's old here, but let's bring in a couple of the young people. How do you see where we are today, Franklin, Kiona?
I would say, I mean, I have 3.5 years experience in the market research industry, which is the same amount of time I've been at Lucid as well. And I'd say in that time, I've slowly started to see some changes. I remember the very first event I ever went to, I think I was the only person of color in that event. And 3.5 years ago, that's not a very long time ago. But I'd say in the space of at least within like maybe 2 years, I've started to see more people of color. I've started to see younger people as well. And, you know, in line with this, I'd like to give a shout out to Graham and Charlene and the rest of the core team, because one thing that I found really empowering about seeing what you guys have done is you've decided, you've become hell-bent on changing the status quo. You know, and the emphasis that you've put on mentoring is really important. I mean, Graham's one of my mentors, and if you'd met me 3.5 years ago, I was really shy, and the thought of having done, you know, a panel like this, I probably would have started running away. But, you know, from the empowerment I've gotten from leadership, the empowerment I've gotten from my mentor, it's really ripped me out of my comfort zone. You know, it's allowed me to excel as quickly as I have been able to. And I think my overall journey has been something that's quite unique and something that's not really ideally seen. You know, in just 3.5 years, going from analyst to senior consultant, I think I've been afforded that by people around me, and you know, the focus we've made on DE&I. And I think for us to really continue and attract more young people, you know, we need to keep that focus on DE&I and, you know, keep being more inclusive and look at diversity and what it can actually provide for the company.
Yeah, thank you. So that mentorship thing's really important. Yeah, I mean, that's really nice to have that.
Yeah, I can't help but agree with you, Franklin. I've been in the industry for just about 10 years. And I also can't help but wonder what impact the global pandemic of COVID-19 has had on this urgency to move things along within the market research industry. People are at home and having conversations and experiencing things in a way that we were not collectively experiencing before. And so it's a bit easier to empathize with what other people may have been experiencing their entire career. And so I'm certainly encouraged by the movement that we've made. I wish that I could say that, like Franklin, it's happened in just my 3.5 years. I think it's been a little bit more spread out from what I can see, but I do appreciate that there are even, you know, more college programs that focus on market research, on data analytics, on storytelling, data visualization. These things were not available as majors when I was in school. And so I think there are changes and positive movements that are happening within the industry. But I definitely think that there's much more that we can do. And to Franklin's point about Charlene and other just change makers and leaders within the industry, I think it's going to take all of us rallying around them and not leaving them alone to do all of the work, but to make sure that we're all doing some of that individual work.
Yeah, interesting. You're saying that you think that the pandemic and this sort of increased our empathy for all these different issues is what you're seeing. I think that's a really fascinating point.
Possibly correlation, but not causation. Don't.
There you go.
I don't want to get called out as an analyst.
There you go. How does that? Anybody else agree with that? Is that how you see it as well? Do you see a sort of a change happening as people are realizing that we can all suffer?
I definitely have. I think it was also just the stillness, sometimes just not having as much to do, and sort of everyone being a bit out of the rat race just meant that everyone could take a step back and really see what's going on in the world. Obviously, in terms of ethnicity and race. We obviously had the George Floyd incident, and I don't think everybody would have, this has been happening, you know, that wasn't a new thing, but the point at which it happened, everyone was still, and therefore it could be amplified, and with the likes of social media and everything, obviously could just be worldwide. And I think that was sort of a catalyst for quite a lot of things. It's a shame it had to obviously happen, but yeah, I think that was the catalyst for a wider conversation.
All right. Sorry, Steve, go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to add, as I think back to maybe 2016 and 2013, in that time frame, I think there was a steady build of female empowerment. And we started to see much more emphasis about women in the C-suite. So I certainly see that from my lens on the board of Women in Research. But we started to see it everywhere. And in California, where I live, there became a mandate to have women on the board of directors of companies, big companies. So we started to see change like that happening. We started to see women becoming CEOs at big corporations, at auto companies, at companies like Pepsi, right? Big, large businesses. And so that momentum was happening. And I was reminded of that last night because the women's soccer team in the US just won a big law case here. And it was announced yesterday that they will now have equal pay. And they've won more championships than the men and all these things. There's many proof points, but they had a huge win, and they're going back and getting that equal pay retroactively. So there was a lot of momentum around women, and I think that momentum has spread more broadly into all areas of diversity, equity, and inclusion through the pandemic. We've seen that through certain events that have occurred, but also just this natural momentum that's been building. So I'm super encouraged and optimistic about that.
Excellent. Well, let's sort of shift focus a little bit then from where we are today and to where we're going tomorrow. And I loved Steve's analogy about, we're in the tanker and now we're sort of in the ferry boat, so to speak. So where should we be? Do we need to get in the speedboat? And sort of where are we getting, and why is it important to get there? I think that's also important for us to maybe spend a few minutes focusing on.
So I think I'd love to see us in the kind of speedboats, and in sustainability, we kind of talk about beyond zero. So I want to see a position where we go beyond D&I. And what I mean by that is diversity. If you imagine going to a wedding, diversity is being invited to the wedding. Being inclusive is being able to dance, but belonging is being able to dance however you want. And I want to get to a stage where we're at a stage of belonging, and everyone feels that they can kind of belong. Also, want to see a stage where we go beyond the business case. I get it. I'm disabled. I do a lot of diversity work. I have to keep talking about the money. Yeah, I have to keep talking about the dollars. Have to keep talking about the pounds. But it's kind of exhausting. Also, want to see a place where we go beyond tokenism. And what I mean by that, and I was one of the few disabled people at the time in the kind of industry and in my kind of company, but I'd often get wheeled out as a voice of disability. Yeah, I haven't got visual impairment, I haven't got hearing impairment, but I'd often be that kind of voice. So to kind of counter that, I want to see kind of more of me, not literally more of me, because that'd be kind of terrifying, but more kind of representation. And then I think the last one is I just want to get beyond groupthink. So the amount of times I do kind of social research, or I do research, and you do research with hard to reach, and it's like people don't understand that background, they haven't come from that background. You sit in a room, you do analysis, and everyone says let's educate them, and it's like, and that's because everyone thinks the same way. And the amount of times I see the industry kind of all leaning and all thinking the same kind of way, and I think to break that down, I really want to see kind of diversity of thought. And it's proven. McKinsey's got data. Diversity of thought means you get better work. But we're about understanding the pulse of culture. And I think to understand that pulse of culture, you've got to have people from different worlds and different experiences, because that allows you to see the bigger picture.
I have to piggyback on what Stephen is saying, because to me, it's just common sense that the market research industry be in the lead in this space. We have the data, we do the interviews, we practice empathy on a daily basis. So it really doesn't make sense to me why we are not leading in all of the numbers that were presented, why we're not ahead of other industries. And so I have to agree with you, Stephen. I think it's time for us to jump in a speedboat and get way ahead of whoever's in the speedboat out front, and make sure that there's representation inside the market research industry, so that we can make sure that we're representative of the people that we're conducting research on. It seems like a no-brainer.
A no-brainer there. Wonderful. Wonderful. And then other people saying, Stephen mentioned at the beginning about clients sort of driving the agenda. Is that something you're seeing also in the US, Dinah or Charlene, for example? Are you seeing clients sort of pushing the DEI agenda?
Go ahead, Charlene. I think we're.
You said in the US. I think you might have meant Kiona for the US, because I'm like.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Okay. US, UK.
I don't really know what the US is doing,
I mean, yes, we do see clients. I think, I can think back to the year 2000 when General Mills was working on some of these initiatives. Of course, they're a really large research buyer in the CPG space in our country and globally. Really, they have offices and partnerships with Nestle in Europe and other parts of the world. Clients, we're seeing it when we are responding to RFPs, right? There's a certain area or section in an RFP where they're asking specifically about DEI types of metrics or initiatives or programs. And they're in different categories. They can be from what's going on in our organization to the suppliers that we work with. And those are areas that we know we need to shine a light on and do a better job of within our organization. We have some bright spots for sure from last year, but more work to do. And we need to do it for ourselves, but we also need to respond to RFPs with the appropriate level of information around our DEI initiatives.
Yeah, just to add about the US perspective, I think we're still seeing it in the examples that I've experienced on both sides. The clients are pushing it depending on the industry. I know Dinah at our company works in the tech industry, and the tech industry is certainly leading in pushing for representation and diversity. But then I focus on the financial services industry, and they're not so forward thinking. And so there is still a push internally from employees and people who just are passionate about it and want to make sure that we are leading and considering perspectives, because at the end of the day, it's still possible to say that you offer diverse, equitable, inclusive services without necessarily showing proof of it. And so we definitely are seeing, at least at Escalent, we have a Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Council, and our employees are holding our executive committee responsible and accountable for the changes that we've either heard clients wanting or that we know would be beneficial for the work that we're doing and the RFPs that we're responding to.
Yeah. Maybe Charlene, you could comment at this from a sort of leadership perspective and how, where we need to be in terms of diverse leadership, diverse employee bases. Some of those numbers we saw where the industry was sort of lagging behind the general population.
Yeah, obviously diverse leadership is super important. It can be difficult because a lot of the time people hire in their own likeness. Obviously there are a lot of biases, unconscious and conscious biases that stop perhaps leadership from hiring people from diverse backgrounds, whether it be ethnicity, disability, or sexual orientation. It's just people tend to hire that person that they would go for a drink with. And there's a lot that needs to be done from the recruitment stages to stop that. And then obviously, and it's sort of like Stephen said, once you are in that place, you need to belong. So it's all good and well recruiting people, but when they get there, what is it about your organization that's actually making people want to stay and make them feel really comfortable? And that sort of is leadership's responsibility. And it's important that they are held accountable for that and don't just say they're doing it, but actively do something.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Okay, so I'm going to move the conversation one step forward to sort of we're now getting into this speedboat and things we talked about, you know, things are going to change. We're going to have to change things, and we are going to have to change them as professional bodies, as companies, and as individuals. And I'd like to bring Franklin in to sort of start the ball rolling here and sort of talk about, you know, what can people as individuals within the industry do either in the short term, you know, what can they do differently when they wake up tomorrow? Maybe some easy things, but then what can they also do more longer term to help change happen?
Thanks, Andrew. I think this is a very important question because considering there are no guidelines to what you can do as an individual. I know for me in my early years, I'm already in my early years, but for the first few years of my career, I was focused on how I was going to be able to grow on my development. And the more senior I became, the more I started to realize how much weight my voice had. I started to consider what I could do on a day-to-day basis to help other people who are similar to me and other people who aren't even from my background. What I decided to do was to become more vocal. And through this, I ended up becoming one of the leaders for Lucid's Global Black Professionals Network. And what we try and focus on doing is empowering and making sure, you know, when you have new joiners, they don't start off with that, you know, that imposter syndrome, where you come into a new place and, like Stephen was saying, you feel like you don't belong. You might feel like you have to work 10 times harder than everyone else. But when you tend to see people in a similar background from you, you know, in positions that are, you know, quite high in the leadership, it also empowers you. You know, you start to think, okay, I see them doing it. I'll put a target on their back, not in a malicious way, in an empowering way, where you see, okay, if they can do it, I'm going to do it. You know, I can do one better. One thing I always say to Graham, for example, is I always tell him, I'm going to take his job. And rather than laughing at me, he always says, you know what, Frank, you can do it and aim higher. And I think just on an individual level, what we can do is just focus on empowering those around us and mentoring as well, because you'd be surprised how powerful that can be on a person's professional and, you know, personal growth.
Right. I mean, that's fantastic. So there's really a lot an individual can do.
Yeah.
To sort of make a difference in the empowerment, in the mentoring, in the, yes, you can do this, you belong.
Yeah, just be vocal, you know, just if you see something, just don't let it slide, just be vocal.
Right, that's really important. Would anybody like to build on that as an individual? What can we do to make change happen today, or longer term, more tricky things as well?
My view is if you look at a company, you have different departments. Yeah, so you say in research, you'll have your quant, you'll have your kind of qual, you'll have your field, you have your accounts, and a bad company kind of says, okay, I just do qual, I don't want to know about quant. Yeah, I think the danger with D&I is people go, they listen a little bit, and then say, well, it's not my job. Yeah, it's just the D&I person's job or personnel's job, and it's not. It's everyone's job, and I think everyone needs to step forward and take ownership of it. And you do that because you learn. And as researchers, we should be curious. And as researchers, we should be wanting to know different experiences. As researchers, we should be going to core and listening to those great voices, going to Pride, listening to those big voices. Because I think that's how we make change, when we don't see it just as a job, but we see it as something that we own. Because that collectively, that's how we're going to make change.
Yeah, I mean, as an individual, I feel really strongly that it starts in your own backyard. So as a manager, as a mentor, you know, you need to be setting an example and doing the things, right? So I feel strongly that I can at least control the things that are in my backyard. I can control if my employees are getting equal pay, men, women, people of color, right? Like, that is one of the first things I look at when I step into a job. And if there's anything that needs to be sorted, I sort it right away. And that's not even advertised per se in my organization. I do it because it's important to me as an individual. It's important to the people that are affected by it too, but it can be a trust building opportunity. But I think it very much starts with you in that regard, because you can't go out and tell other people to do things in the industry, right, or advocate for things unless you yourself are living that. And I think, the way that I've felt it at different levels in my career, because I came up through the sales ranks and was oftentimes the only female on the sales leadership team, right? And I did feel like I had to work twice as hard in those scenarios. And there were times where, even in starting my own company, I had an angel investor say to me, "Do you think it's harder for you because you're female?" And it was the first time I was like taken aback. I appreciated the honesty, but it was the first time somebody had said anything like that to me. And I thought to myself, is being a female a disability? Like, is that like in my head, that wasn't something that I let hold me back from anything. And so I had to step back and really rethink my strategy in that moment for fundraising and going out and getting Series A funding and things. And so, you have to check yourself on how you show up. You have to check your own backyard of the team that you manage, and then you can take those things more broadly to an industry. And so I do think it starts with us as individuals and how we behave on a day-to-day basis, and how we treat people, and how we manage, and how we think about ourselves too. So,
and I do think in general, it's just I'll quickly say it's just important for people to realize that any large movement started with one person. So you can often think, I'm an individual and I don't make a difference, but you never know what difference you'll make unless you go forward and do it. These organizations that we have, Pride, Wire, Core, although they started with groups of people coming together, but the one person had to initiate it. It all starts with one person.
You just can't sit there and say, I wish this was going to happen.
Otherwise, nothing ever gets done.
Yeah, that's good. All right, let's sort of focus a little bit on what companies can do, though. I mean, we know individuals, we've talked a bit about that, but now let's put the onus on the bosses and the boards and the management teams of these companies. And maybe, Kiona, you could start by sharing a few words about what the DEI Council at Escalent is up to.
Sure. We are up to a lot and working very hard to be that speedboat that we've been talking about all panel long. One of the things we're focusing on is removing some of the barriers for people to get into the market research industry. A lot of times we have job postings that require something like a bachelor's degree or a master's degree or a certain amount of experience in the industry. But a lot of us here on this call probably know that some of it is built into our personalities and is innate. And so figuring out ways to remove barriers from people entering into the market research industry. Dinah also alluded to, we've noticed that a lot of our more diverse employees are part-time. And so trying to unpack, well, what do people who are mothers, what do people who are caregivers, what do people who may not have a degree, what do they need so that we can continue to push them along and help elevate them? And so I love what Franklin talked about with the mentors. We're also looking to tap into making a specific mentorship program for people of diverse backgrounds, whether that's disabilities or ethnicity or other identifying factors. And so making sure that we train our managers to be able to mentor people who do not look like them and who do not have the same advantages that they've had throughout their career, or disadvantages. And so those are just a few of the efforts we're trying to do. I think what's really important is making sure that leadership is on board. And so I wouldn't say that that means it's a top-down approach. To Charlene's point, everything starts with one individual. So it can be an individual who is not at the top of the organization, having that courage to reach out and say to someone, hey, I think change needs to happen. What can we do in this area or that area? So I believe that's how the Escalent DEI Council started, was one employee reached out to our CEO and said that Charlene mentioned it was the George Floyd incident, that it impacted her in a certain way and she wanted to do something about it. And here we are 2 years later, really working hard and putting money into the effort.
Right, and that's it, right? So the organization is giving time and money to this effort. That's
Exactly.
important. Yeah, it's not something you have to do on a Sunday morning.
No.
Excellent. Charlene, Franklin, what are your companies up to sort of in this area? What's the companies doing? What should they be doing more of?
I think in general, they should be looking at the way that they recruit. And Kieran touched on many of those things, but, you know, people needing to have a 2-1 degree from sort of an Oxbridge university when it has absolutely nothing to do with their day-to-day job, and it actually means nothing about when it comes to their capabilities either, is something that I think should be scrapped. For the, you know, it's just, as long as somebody can do their job, and you can see that they'll be proficient and they have reason to believe that they can do this job, there's no reason why they should be stopped. And there are many reasons why certain people can't get to these universities and can't perhaps, you know, get the same opportunities, and you're stopping them from getting through the door. Obviously the biases with names and interviewing, and blind CVs, there obviously is still the bias once people do get through the doors, but it at least stops one. You know, there's so many CVs that people go through. A lot of the time, mentally, they just strike someone off when they can't pronounce a name.
Right.
I think things like that companies should be doing.
I certainly agree. I think it really does stem at the recruitment level. And it's funny you mentioned, Charlene, about, you know, pronouncing people's names. Andrew, you did a great job at actually pronouncing my last name.
And we didn't even practice that. So
over the years, everyone adds extra A's, extra TS's, and little things like that do actually, you know, they do stick with you. But going back to, you know, recruitment, I think it is really important to not really look at the university someone's gone to, if they have a degree even, or, you know, their years of experience, because like Charlene was mentioning, you know, everyone can do the job. You know, you just have to really focus on the person, because if you're willing to invest in that person, they will give you 110%. You know, you'll probably find someone who's not coming from, you know, the same top university might be hungrier than everyone else. You know, they will want it even more because they feel like they have something to prove. You know, that's why I think, you know, really at recruitment levels, we need to consider, you know, thinking outside of the box, because sometimes, you know, even market research, I didn't really learn about market research until after university. You know, it's not really an industry that tends to, you know, do university open days or, you know, reaches out to high schools. I think that's really where we might be missing, you know, a large pool of, you know, people who would be amazing within the industry.
Yeah, maybe that's a good segue into what industry and professional bodies can do. And maybe we'll start with Stephen and then to Dinah on.
I totally agree with that. I think that's so true. We need to sow that kind of seed kind of early. I just finished a big project looking at kind of working class kids in the advertising industry, something kind of quite similar, and they're just not there. The army's there, the NHS is there in the schools, the apprenticeships are there, Rolls Royce are there, but the industry is just not there. And I think, yeah, absolutely, kind of scrap the degree. I just want to see people that are kind of curious. But as an industry, we've got to research those people and how we can best attract those people, because sometimes they don't have with that public school attitude that we can sell and conquer the world. They fall apart in the interview stage. So how can we get people over that hurdle and see the best of that person? Give them interview questions before, you know, have a pre-chat. I mean, there's different ways, but that's what I really kind of want to see and kind of encourage. I'm quite encouraged by the professional industry. I think there's a lot of people that are really kind of driving change, but I do think in some ways the market research industry needs a bit of a rebrand. Yeah? It needs research on itself, because people think it's people with clipboards in the street, and there's nothing wrong with that. But that is our association, and people don't understand the wealth and the diversity and the structure and how you can progress and how you can see the world. All these really strong benefits people don't really understand. And I think let's do some research on ourselves and how we're perceived, because I think that will give a lot of cues about how we can better promote ourselves.
Yeah, that sounds like another no-brainer to me. Market research industry doing some research. How about that? Dinah, tell us what the Idea Council Insights Association is up to.
Yeah, one of the, I think, maybe speedboats that's hopefully emerging out of the Insights Association, and I do want to give props to Bianca Pryor, who saw an opportunity and started the Idea Council with Melanie Cartwright over at Insights Association. There's others who have joined the cause, including myself. I'm a participant in it, as is Equitas Insights, and we are working very hard to create a new fellowship program. It's called the Ideators Fellowship Program. It's an internship program, and it's all about bringing more people of color into the industry. So we're piloting it this year. I'm really proud to say that Escalent is a founding sponsor, so we're putting money in to help get it off the ground, as is Schlesinger. So, there's some other names that are supporting this event that are also supporting our fellowship program, but it's going to be launching in July. And so we've got sponsors, we've got people that are going to be hosting interns. We are sourcing from a variety of sources that are coming together now. We've got maybe 6 different hosts identified, and we need 6 more. We'd like to have 12 interns in this pilot year so that we can learn and expand the program. So a lot of the benchmarking we're doing in the US is to look at our industry right now and see how this program can impact our industry. Also one of the challenges in the US at Escalent, just overall, is there are not enough people of color in any ranks in market research. So it becomes really challenging to promote people into management, into C-level, because there just aren't enough folks at all the companies across the industry to do that. And so we need to bring more people in and give them that experience and raise them through the ranks so that we can see more folks of leadership coming up through, people of color coming up through the ranks in our industry. So that's the intent of this. We're also talking about, what does the job description need to look like so that it's equitable. And so we're really excited about this program. If anyone wants to learn more about it, please reach out to me or the Idea Council.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. That's wonderful. And I mean, that builds on what Franklin just started that whole conversation about. Let's start at the recruitment, let's roll it out, and everybody's talking about how we can do that. And maybe, Charlene, you can wrap up things by talking a little bit about core and what core is going to be up to, how that's helping drive things forward.
Yeah, so core kind of research, where we have our mentorship program, which we've obviously spoken about, and it's going very well. We're going into the next stage of that now. And yeah, mentorship is just something that's so important. We've just recently had a round table on it as well, because I think it's just having somebody there that can help you, guide you when we're suffering from imposter syndrome, when we do have those moments of doubt, is sort of invaluable. Obviously working on allyship so that, we can speak to different individuals to actually make that active change. So yeah, there's a lot of exciting things happening, and we've got a lot of support from the industry, which is why I feel like wholeheartedly that the research world, in general, is really up for change, and it's heartening for me.
Yeah, thank you. We've got about a minute left. If anybody would like to add any final words of wisdom before I wrap up. If not, then I'm going to wrap up by saying I feel optimistic too, listening to you guys. I mean, I know as an industry, we do have a long way to go still. I mean, there's no sweeping that under the carpet, but I think the awareness is now really there, the intention that something needs to be done, and the willingness to do something, I think, is happening at an individual, a company, and an industry level. And I think, it's partly, yes, client driven, but I think it's deeper than that. I think there is a realization that this is an opportunity, I think, as Kiona said, for the industry to get ahead of the others. Right? We don't have to play catch up in this area. We really could, as an industry, be leading the way in this, because, we need it, not only for the clients, but to be good researchers. We need to understand society in all its forms. So I'm optimistic about that. And I think you presented lots of good ideas about how we could move things forward. I think this diversity in recruitment is definitely key, and almost everybody I know fell into the industry anyway. So, it's pretty pointless setting all this criteria and then anyway, getting people otherwise into the industry. So why don't we just do that? Why don't we just get diverse with our recruitment strategies and then build these mentorship programs inside the companies with the support of the leadership, the resources they're putting in, and then also the guidelines, the resources, the industry bodies, professional bodies can add and support companies and individuals. I think we can have a bright future. It's not going to be tomorrow, but we can make a difference tomorrow already. As Franklin said, we can start doing things differently when we wake up tomorrow, start having those conversations, start being vocal, start telling stories. We're storytellers in this industry, so let's tell stories about diversity and get everybody dancing their own dance at the wedding, as Stephen said. I think that's a wonderful thing to think about. So thank you, everybody on the panel, for your contribution today, and thank you to anybody listening in the audience. Hopefully you enjoyed that, and there's going to be a breakout room where hopefully we will be there to answer any questions and carry on the conversation afterwards. So thank you, and that is a wrap.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.